In this video, I'm going to first discuss the reasoning behind my story choice, Littering in Manchester. I will also reflect on what preparation was involved for my video assessment and evaluate what I think went well and what I could have done better. I will then talk about my audio interview with Rosemary Bibby and do the same. I chose to cover recycling and litter in Manchester, as I had recently begun a course with UNCC Learn so I could improve my knowledge of the climate crisis. This made me think of how a fairly flippant act like littering can in the long run massively affect our environment. I then read a Manchester City Council report from 2021, which detailed the extent of the issue and what needed to be done. It was an interesting read, and I learned even more interesting facts, like that 18 million tonnes of CO2 are saved a year by recycling, which has the same environmental impact as taking 12 million cars off the road. I then decided to take to the streets and see if I could see any evidence of litter around me, and take some dynamic and interesting pictures to accompany my story. My favourite is the one of all the rubbish bags out on the street, as I think I was able to make it look fairly professional. One thing I could have done better was my photography skills, as I feel whilst they go well with my story, some of my pictures could have come out better if I had more practice and took my time. I also feel I could have found an interview, maybe from a council member or a volunteer who is involved with organising clean-up programmes, as I felt that could have enhanced the story even more. Paul Bradshaw says in his book, The Online Journalism Handbook, if you're looking for people at the heart of the story, one key technique is to identify who might be affected and what sorts of phrases they might use. If I got first-hand knowledge of what it takes to clean up the streets, I feel that my story could have a more rounded focus. In addition, I feel I could have made the editing of my videos smoother as to make it a more pleasant watch. As for my audio interview, I felt it was slightly easier to know what I wanted the focus to be. Luckily, I knew my aunt, Rosemary Bibby, had a story to tell. I chose to do the interview about Rosemary's father, my grandfather, who fought in World War II. He also brought back German spy maps, which I thought would make an interesting feature to the story. We sat down and discussed what we were going to talk about. I also took this time to ask any questions about her father so that I could get a clearer feel for his background. Note that I also knew quite a bit already, considering I had heard stories from time to time growing up. I also took the time before to write down an intro and questions so that I wouldn't leave anything out. I think that overall it was a nice interview. I wanted it to feel as if the listener had sat down at the table with us and was listening in on a conversation. I feel by including the sounds of the German spy war maps rustling in the background as I picked them up, I was able to achieve a more interesting interview for the listener, as obviously they have to rely on me to describe what the maps look like. There were obviously a few issues to begin with. We ended up doing many takes, and at one point the phone rang, which was a bit of a distraction. Writer Stuart Peter, in his book Broadcast Journalism, says that phones need to be taken off the hook to prevent them from ringing. The mic will be getting on with its job to pick up as much sound in the room. I definitely should have thought of that. I also think the interview itself could have been clearer. I felt you could hear Rosemary well, but at times my voice was fairly muffled and echoed due to us being in her kitchen. I then had to adjust that in editing so that it would sound like we were at least in the same room and give the audio more of a flow. In reflection, I would definitely make sure the levels were at a good setting so my voice would sound clearer. I think finding the right place to do the interview was probably the most challenging, as it forced me to really listen to my surroundings, which is something I'm not used to doing. Stuart Peter also says not all rooms are ideal for interviewing, and whilst we did try another room, I also experienced other sounds like a loud ticking clock, which wouldn't have worked in my favour. As the sound was off, and you could hear some of the handling of the microphone as I was introducing Rosemary, I also had to record a separate audio for the intro, which, whilst being a hassle, also I think enhanced the interview, making it more professional. Overall, I think it has been a good learning experience for me, as I was able to further my knowledge of what goes into making a video slideshow and doing an audio interview by myself.